All right, well, we have the live indication on our windows here, so I am very excited to welcome everyone to Conductor Guild Google Hangouts. This is session number 3, and today we are addressing with a panel of experts a series of topics related to the audition process in the conducting world. My name is John Devlin, and I am one of the members of the Board of Directors of the Conductors Guild, and I'm currently based in Washington, D.C., where I serve as the cover conductor for the National Symphony Orchestra. I'm also the assistant conductor of the Princeton Symphony up in New Jersey, and I run my own orchestra here in D.C. called the Gourmet Symphony. And I'm very happy to welcome here 3 distinguished panelists who are going to kind of guide our conversation today, and we're going to start with Henry Fogel.
Hi, Henry Fogel, currently Dean of the Chicago College of Performing Arts at Roosevelt University. Have been one way or another in the music and orchestra field for 52 years that I'm still standing. Mainly for 18 years president of Chicago Symphony, then president of the League of American Orchestras. Now, while I'm a dean, I do consult with a number of orchestras and have for many years on music director searches. So I've seen the search from a variety of ends and hope I can bring some useful perspective to the conductors.
Great.
And I'm Diane Wittry, and I'm the conductor of the Allentown Symphony in Pennsylvania. And this is about a $3 million professional orchestra, per-service orchestra. I'm also the author of the book Beyond the Baton. And this is a book that's more about the industry and about the conductor's job off the podium and how we deal with all of that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabriel Lefkowitz. I am in my 5th season as concertmaster of the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra, and I've also been a guest concertmaster with Buffalo and the Louisville Orchestra. And right now in Knoxville, we're actually going through a music director search. So I have seen 8 conductors, almost all of whom were interested in the position here over the last few months. And we have one more to go next month before making our decision on a new music director. So I've also been very interested in this whole process from a musical and administrative point of view.
All right. Well, thank you so much to all 3 of you for making the time, and I think we're very blessed to have such a wide variety of perspectives on this issue. Somebody who's primarily been on the administrative side, Diane Wittry, of course, as the conductor in residence here today, and then Gabe from both a player and a committee standpoint from an orchestra who's actively going through a music director search. So welcome, everyone. So the first question that we have is directed primarily here for Diane, and we're going to ask you, what advice would you give conductors as they begin application processes? So how would you suggest that they choose jobs to which they have a real chance? How would they measure that kind of application process as far as the orchestras that they should direct their attention to? And then how do you create a packet that really shows that you've thought about that critically and why you would be a good candidate for a specific job?
Well, you know, the field is very competitive these days, and so as you're looking at what jobs are out there, you have to be thinking, where do you eventually want to land up, and what are the right stepping stones for you? You know, so you're going to see a lot of professional orchestras having assistant conductor job openings. You're going to see regional paid orchestras. You're going to see community orchestras. And so first off is deciding what you're interested in, and then is looking at your credentials. So you're going to have a lot of competition because people that already have jobs are going to be applying, as well as people that are fresh out of school. So when you're looking for that, probably not best to throw your name in for a job that you're not quite qualified for. They might get 300 or 400 applications, so you may want to pick a smaller orchestra, a regional orchestra, or you may want to have a strategy of your, you know, if you really want to do professional, then wait for that professional orchestra to open up. Mm-hmm. You know, some people are limited by the region, they can't move, and so then you're looking at jobs only open within about a 3-hour radius of where you are, something you can drive to. So once you figure out what you want to do, what jobs are open, what you can apply, you've got to put together a packet that's competitive. And I was lucky actually on a job that I left that they during their search allowed me to sort of help them look through all the applications, and it was really eye-opening for me to see what jumps out of a packet and what works and what really doesn't work. So you don't want to send the inch-thick packet of every single program you've ever conducted. And if you're at that level, then that's just too much information. The committee wants very quickly to go through the information. They want to have a 1 or 2 page resume. If you're still at the point where you're putting every single concert on your resume that you've conducted, maybe you're not quite ready for that job either. You want to be able to put conducting positions that you've had titles that are hopefully similar to the job that you're going to be applying for. So you want to make sure that it's professional, it doesn't have any typos in it, that you're able to communicate your strengths in a very short amount of time. I'd also say that the press photo is, I think, important because you can send a professional one, or you can send one that you took on your cell phone, and people are looking for that face that they can use on their marketing, and so that's something to think about. Is the quality of your overall packet has to be at a very, very professional level, because that's what you're up against. And I know, Henry, you've looked at a lot of these packets. I think you can add some words here.
Well, I think one of the most overlooked parts of the application packet, and one of the most important, is the cover letter. Let's face it, the resume is what it is. I mean, you can lay it out differently, but it's a set of facts. The cover letter is the chance where you have to say, hey, this is me. The first, I think, most important thing is don't send a form cover letter that clearly is the same cover letter you send to every orchestra with just the name of the orchestra changed. If you want the job, spend, I don't know, not much more than a half hour, maybe 45 minutes, researching something about that orchestra, from their website, from their promotional material. Find something unique about them, something that they think is unique about themselves, that resonates with you, that somehow rings a bell with you, and speak to that. Spend 1 paragraph, no more, but 1 paragraph of your letter saying, I noticed that you have this community program, or this education program, or this artistic focus, and that really speaks to me. And then you talk about why it speaks to your own experience. What you're trying to do in your first letter is you want to distinguish yourself. The smallest orchestras in America, professional orchestras, are going to get between 150 and 200 applications. You at least want to get to the stage where they'll look at your video. And you've got to have something that stands out from the others. And the line I've heard from search committees is, this applicant, this fellow, this person is just looking for a job. I would like to have somebody who's looking for this job. So indicating that you've even invested the time to learn something about the orchestra is a very important part of what you're sending in.
Great. And Gabe, do you have some follow-up thoughts on that?
Yeah, to absolutely echo what Henry's saying, it's kind of a matter of pride, too, for the local orchestra. We have things we do here in Knoxville, and I'm sure every smaller orchestra does, unique programs that they're really proud of. So for a conducting applicant to show us that they've researched that and can be proud with us about that type of thing makes a big difference.
Great. And Henry, you mentioned something already that might be something considered a mistake in an application packet, where you send a form letter that's obviously just that, and you haven't identified a critical characteristic of the orchestra that makes it a compelling match for your skill set and background. Can you perhaps give us a few examples of other common mistakes that you see in an application packet that might disqualify an otherwise qualified conductor?
Well, yes. If you're applying for a professional orchestra job, don't list your education at the top of the resume. Don't list the school orchestras that you've conducted at the top of your resume. List the professional orchestras. Obviously, as Diane says, if you've had a position, that's great. But look, every single conductor, even Herbert von Karajan, at some point in his life, had to get a first job. So if this is going to be your first position, but you've guest conducted at orchestras, you list those. Particularly if an orchestra has invited you more than once, make that clear. Don't list, I'll use Knoxville since they're here, don't list Knoxville in 2014 and then you've got 3 other orchestras and then down below it says Knoxville 2010 and then 4 orchestras down it says Knoxville 2008. Put where you've got the most recent, Knoxville 2014, 2011, 2008. That's a terrific signal to a committee that whatever this conductor may have, this orchestra invited them back more than once. That's a real positive. But put the professional orchestras first. If you're applying for a university job, put your education-related jobs at the top. So that is sort of one of the things. You mentioned typos. Please be careful. The most embarrassing that I got here at Roosevelt was a conductor who sent us an application and a cover letter that said it's a pleasure to apply for the director of orchestra's position at the Sydney Conservatory of Music. Now, I assume the people in Sydney got the Roosevelt letter, but the search committee just threw that out. It was, and I happened to know the conductor, and I actually said to them, "This is actually a good conductor. Sorry if he or she can't even take the trouble to get the right letter in the right envelope," or actually it was email, "can't get the right name on the application, we're not interested." So watch out for spelling. There's no E in Copeland. I can't tell you how many people conduct Copeland's Appalachian Spring with an E in Copeland.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd like to add, you know, I think with resumes, you have to know what to leave off. You know, people think, oh, I've got to put everything on there, and there's things that do not apply to the job that are better left off. You know, a lot of times somebody has maybe some job, maybe they conduct a church choir. I say that probably doesn't belong on a resume where you're applying for professional orchestra. Same thing if you taught elementary school. You know, if you're applying for a college job, there's too much of a distance between there. So it's really thinking about what to leave on your resume, and then the others, you know, you're simply not going to put on that resume for that job.
Great. And Henry, do you have maybe one more thought?
Yes, I do. Don't waste the committee's time and yours sending reviews. I have never seen a committee that pays any attention to them for a couple of reasons. One, most committees don't have a lot of respect for most music critics. But even going beyond that, I've never encountered a conductor who sent bad reviews in. And any conductor with 5 years of experience will find some good reviews. They're not of value. They take up space. It's not worth it.
Great. And I do have one thing to add here. One of the things that I've learned as we go through this process, and actually I spoke with a music entrepreneurship specialist named David Cutler at the University of South Carolina about this, and he said, you have to find a way to brand yourself. So just the same way you're identifying maybe the brand of the orchestra to which you're applying, when I write my cover letter, I try to pick a perspective that I think will resonate with the committee, but that's something that's very true about me. And I love crossover projects. I love designing new types of concert experiences. And if I sense that an orchestra or a school that I might want to have a conducting position at would appreciate that, I go hard in that direction. So in the cover letter, like you said, Henry, I make sure to alert them that, hey, if you are looking for someone that's in my case, you can tell, young, energetic, and really excited to design a new type of experience for your orchestra. You know, it's a very happy buzzword right now, the 21st century ensemble, or the 20th century orchestra experience. But if you have something real to bring to that discussion, go for it and define yourself in a specific way that if they're looking for someone like that, they'll pick you, at least like you said, Henry, to review your video or go put you onto the next stage. But if you are just sending in a general application that describes you as a good conductor, well, there are 50 other people presenting themselves that way. So I found that specificity and really picking a lane and sticking to it works better than not.
I agree completely, and it's very important to. I said, and this is not rhetoric, every small orchestra will get between 150 and 200 applications. Adrian, Michigan, the Adrian Symphony that I'm currently working with, got 165 applications. How do you sort of separate yourself? They will look at most, they will look at 40 videos. That's the high end. Do you realize what that means? 110 to 120 of the applicants will not get to the video stage. So the real test is, how do I get myself to the 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 whose videos they will look at? And the cover letter is a great tool to do that.
Great. Well, Gabe, circling back around to the top of our discussion, you mentioned that the Knoxville Symphony is currently in the midst of a music director search, and actually, like you said, 8 conductors of various experience levels have come through your orchestra as guest conductors over the last year and a half, and you've engaged with all of them. Can you tell us, and keeping anonymity, of course, what are some of the things that conductors have done that have put them at the top of your list, and what are some possible errors or bad decisions that have been made that have hurt people's candidacy?
Sure. Well, I was kind of preparing my thoughts for tonight. I put the on-podium stuff into 5 categories of musically what you can do to win over musicians, and they are your technique, your interpretation, your vision for the orchestra, which has a lot to do with problem solving. It's how people can see whether or not they feel like you're going to elevate the level of the orchestra. Rehearsal technique is huge, and personality/demeanor on the podium. So going through technique, here's something where I've been really impressed by the candidates we've been getting. When you're at the point where you get invited to be a guest candidate with an orchestra like Knoxville, the technique of all the candidates we've had has been very good, but some advice I can offer is err on the side of clarity. It's fine to let the orchestra play. I would really not stop beating ever unless you're doing it to prove a point that the orchestra can play together. And if you do that, make no assumptions, no matter how familiar the music is, that the musicians will be comfortable to play if they're not given a cue, or especially if you're, maybe doing the concerto with a soloist and it's a cadenza. Make sure you make some kind of announcement or make it very obvious when you're going to bring the orchestra back in. There's all kinds of repertoire we've played, some of it not concerti, where a conductor will let a soloist within the orchestra play, and it is so helpful and so impressive when they have foreseen our discomfort, especially if the music is not familiar, and said while that players doing their solo, the next beat I give will be at measure 4/17. That puts us at ease. It shows us that the candidate is really experienced with working with orchestras of a certain level, and it makes us feel a lot better. If you're on the fence of using a baton or not, I would say please use a baton. For me, sitting so close to the conductor, I actually, we have conductors who go back and forth between using a baton and not. And I like to say I'm in the easiest chair in the orchestra to see what a conductor is doing. Sometimes I can't even remember whether they used a baton or not. But to the folks in the back of the orchestra, it matters. And even though I have seen very successful conductors not use a baton, it will always be a recurring complaint and comment from folks in the back of the orchestra who felt a lack of clarity because they couldn't see what was going on. If you are young and able, stand during rehearsals would be another comment, rather than sitting. It is for the sake of comfort that we don't want the concert to be the first time a baton and your gestures are at a different height and placement than we're used to seeing them. It makes a difference. Perhaps it shouldn't, but again, you're trying to win over a group of 80 people, and there will always be those people who have those concerns. Okay, interpretation. What I found works well is when a conductor has very clear, reachable goals for a week. We, in Knoxville, are on the same schedule to do really hard repertoire as any of the top 5 orchestras. We have 3 or 4 rehearsals and 2 performances, which isn't as many as the great orchestras, but it's the same amount of hours of rehearsal time. So what we love to feel as musicians is that we came into our first rehearsal, got a very clear picture of what the musical goal and interpretation was for the repertoire we're doing, and that we really got there by our dress rehearsal. One of the worst feelings is being at the end of a dress rehearsal and going right up until the last minute because we feel like we're scrambling to get more of what a candidate or a conductor is trying to get out of us. We want to feel like we lived up to the interpretation that was set before us that week. And, you know, I would say, in general, orchestral musicians, you know, we take, for all of our griping and complaining, we take a lot of pride in what we do, and we want to do a good job, and we want to do a good job for a music director candidate that treats us well. Vision and problem solving. We love to see glimpses of how, if someone was to be given, or was to earn, I should say, that music director position, we love to see a glimpse of how they will elevate the level of the orchestra. So to address systemic problems within the ensemble like intonation, balance tendencies, if some folks rush, if some folks drag, please go after those things, but if you're going to go after those things, make sure you get a result very quickly. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, this has been something that has upset musicians, was when we had a candidate come in and try to make drastic changes and not succeed, that we end up spending more than 20 minutes trying to fix a passage, and it just doesn't end up working or getting any better. That's one of the worst things that an orchestra can experience during this type of a search.
Gabe, can I
Yes.
ask you a question?
Sure.
Something I've observed. Sometimes I saw a conductor kind of lose a job in a rehearsal. He would stop passages and say, "There's an intonation problem here," but he wouldn't indicate the oboes are sharp, the flutes are flat, whatever. He just, you know. And as one musician said to me later, we actually knew that. We were looking for the conductor to help us fix it. So I think part of this, and this is why I'm asking you to address it as an orchestra player, I spoke to this conductor later. He actually knew what the problem was. It was a bad strategy, trying not to offend any specific player in a group that was going to decide on whether to hire him by singling them out. But
sure.
I think you have to help them fix the problem. There's just a way to do it tactfully.
Absolutely. My advice would be, when it comes to intonation, maybe the first rehearsal, see how things go, and then after that rehearsal, remember those spots that didn't go well or where there were problems, and please consult the principals. We principals of the orchestra have so many personally held beliefs on what would fix, you know, the big issue. So please consult us. Any concertmaster worth his salt will be happy to take phone calls and have extra discussions with you outside of the rehearsals and let you know their opinion of how things are going. And don't forget, you know, we all know within the orchestra what some of the personnel weaknesses are, and we're waiting to see if a music director candidate can assess those things. And if they can, it is the most impressive thing. But you do yourself a big favor by just talking to the concertmaster or whomever beforehand. And sure, some of us are going to have our biases, but definitely consult. And, you know, if more of our candidates consulted me, I would tell them what the tendencies are. Because when you get to a new, unfamiliar orchestra, it's difficult to immediately assess, oh, this person, you know, has a real tendency of dragging. And I mean, you can really rely on the principals to help you out in that kind of way. But no, Henry, you're absolutely right. Don't be vague in your problem solving, because if you address a problem, then we definitely want it solved. Which goes to my next point, which is rehearsal technique. Again, it's that sense of accomplishment. We want to feel like things are getting better all of the time. We love running repertoire. I would say it's not necessary in a symphony to run the entire symphony before going back and rehearsing, but certainly, and especially the less familiar the music is, we want a chance to run an entire movement before stopping and working on things. And also keep in mind, no matter how familiar the repertoire is, an orchestra like Knoxville, we only do 8 masterworks, which is what we call our classical series, per season. So that means any Beethoven symphony is on a maybe 5 or 6 year rotation. It's been 5 or 6 years since we've played that before. So it's really great for us to have a chance to play through things often. Let's see. Again, the running out of time in a dress rehearsal makes us feel like we didn't accomplish what the conductor wanted us to accomplish. So if anything, if you can find a way to let the musicians out early, and I know I'm going to sound like a jaded orchestral musician here, but it really makes a psychological difference and gives us confidence going into the concerts. If we feel at the end of the dress rehearsal that we've got what you were after and that we're happy with the way everything's going, come into the rehearsals with a real understanding of when the breaks are, how long they need to be, and how the clock operates. We've had issues before where there were multiple clocks around the rehearsal space, which probably is not the best thing, and a conductor was looking at the wrong one. That's not the official timekeeper for the rehearsal, and that's a really unnecessary trap to have fallen into, and they thought they had a little bit more time than they did, and it made the end of a dress rehearsal very tense. Something else here.
I think your last one was personality?
Yes, personality. Just be authentic. We've had a whole range of different types of personalities on the podium and a different range of ages. If humor is your thing, by all means tell jokes. We've had conductors get away with jokes that from other conductors would be totally inappropriate, and from a musician standpoint we were entertained and it went over very well and was charming. If in doubt, probably be more cautious about that type of thing. We're always impressed when you learn our names. I've heard some theories, which I understand, that say if you're singling out a musician you should refer to the second bassoonist rather than their name, but if you happen to start learning the names of the orchestral musicians, it goes a long way in being personable and making us feel like you care. And, giving out praise and being self-deprecation, again, it's all about being authentic. I would say if you are a nerd, be a nerd on the podium. If you are dashing and exciting, be dashing and exciting. Don't try to be anything that you're not. Authenticity is key.
Great.
Yeah, and if I can add one quick thing is, if you think you have a really clever phrase, don't overuse it. I watched a conductor in a conducting competition where Leonard Slatkin and I were among the judges. 5 minutes into the rehearsal, he said to the orchestra, no, don't give away the music's secrets too soon. And Leonard looked at me and said, hey, that's a pretty good line. Well, by the end of the rehearsal, he'd used it 5 times. And it just turned everybody off.
And this is actually probably a great question for all three of you, because everyone has an experience at some level with this. But Gabe, you did a great job at outlining some of the things that are considerations for on the podium technique behavior. What about off the podium? What are things that, when you're in conducting school, you don't think too much about, but then you get there, and when you're one of 3 or 4, or as you said, 8 people that are in the finals for a job, what are the things, with the board and with the education department, and especially if you're an assistant conductor, you're going to be working with the education department. How can you win or lose a job in those areas? And anybody who would like to, I think, can chime in here.
Let me jump in quickly, because this I have seen too many times. First of all, keep your answers relatively brief. I mean, in many orchestras will go to videos, and from videos they will narrow it down to, let's say, 10 candidates when they only want 5 finalists, and they'll do a Skype interview. Well, I saw a conductor lose the possibility of being invited by taking 15 minutes to answer the first question that he was asked on the Skype interview, when the whole Skype interview was only 25 minutes long. So be brief. But the other thing, and I can't stress this enough, in your conversation about things you've done and been a part of that have been successful, where you can use the word we instead of the word I can't say that strongly enough. If I did this, and when this orchestra was there, I raised $400,000 for this, and I led this change, and it becomes, after a while, people say, does this person work and play well with others? Use the we, talk about yourself as a colleague, whether with the board, the management, the musicians, the community.
To add to that, I think, sometimes when you go into an interview, your head is so full of whatever job you're doing currently that you tend to refer always to the job you have. And I think if you can answer questions with people referring to their orchestra and building upon what they already have, and sort of to describe to them what your vision of not only the starting point but where you think the organization can be, makes them believe in you more and see you more as the leader for their orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And Gabe, do you have any thoughts? You're seeing a lot of these things, and I know that you spend a lot of time with conductors off the podium, sometimes even in social settings. What are some traps that people fall into?
Yeah, our folks have been pretty good about it, but be prepared to go out with the musicians afterwards. We're depending on the orchestra, musicians are very social creatures, as you know, and actually, I will say almost every one of our conductors has come out for a drink or a meal with the musicians after a concert or two, or even a rehearsal earlier in the week. And I would echo what I was saying earlier about authenticity. We have had conductors who have bought shots for all of the musicians out at a bar, and it can work really well. As long as it doesn't feel like they're trying to buy you off. But if you are a person who enjoys drinking and has certain tastes, and you find like-minded people in the orchestra, by all means. And we've had other conductors who wouldn't even accept a drink from a musician in the orchestra. And as long as you're authentic to who you are, I think that comes across really genuinely. And you needn't pretend to be anything that you're not or do anything that makes you uncomfortable. And I would echo when it comes to interacting with administration folks, we're going to ask everyone what their ideas are to attract younger audiences to our concerts. It is more important that you display passion for what we're already doing and a willingness to explore with us than to have the answer to that question, because nobody does.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's some great discussion on both on and off podium elements. Let's swing back to on podium. So we'll start with Henry and Gabe, and then move to Diane to get the conductor perspective on this. And Diane, we've talked about this. I know you have great ideas about videos. So Henry, you mentioned that about 1 out of 4 conductors is lucky enough to have their videos reviewed at that first preliminary stage. What are things that you see in really successful reels, even as far as excerpt length, type of repertoire, and quality of the performance, and what things that you see are off-putting to a committee, and especially considering that most of the time you will have 0 or 1 person on a committee that is actually a conductor. What impresses the people on the board, or the staff, or musicians, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and what you will have are musicians on the committee, and frankly, most of the lay people, most of the board members, will defer to the staff, to the musicians in judging videos, because most board members know what they don't know. It's interesting how this question has changed over the years because of technology. What should the length of excerpt be? That question is no longer important, because now you're sending links, and each viewer can choose. There are some who want to see little 5-minute segments. There are other viewers, I happen to be one of them, that if I like what I see at the beginning, I want to see that conductor shape at least a whole movement. Well, now you, the conductor, don't have to make that choice. It used to be you sent in, first it was a VHS tape, and then it was a video disc, and you would put excerpts on it. Now, you put the link up of hopefully the whole piece, and let the viewer scroll to whatever they want to see. It is important that you provide videos, different styles of repertoire. There should be something classical, mid-Beethoven and earlier. There should be something romantic. There should be something 20th century. I mean, it doesn't have to be avant-garde. It probably shouldn't be avant-garde, but certainly Bartók, Stravinsky, or Corigliano, or Michael Torki, something that shows that you can handle multiple meters or shifting rhythms or whatever, shifting meters. I think a lot of conductors worry about the fact that the quality of the orchestra that they've got a video from isn't that good. Most committee members can tell what you're doing on the podium, and they know if the orchestra isn't up to it, they're not going to blame you. You're not cracking the horn note. If the attacks aren't together, they can tell whether that's simply because it's an inexperienced orchestra or your beat isn't clear. Much more important is that something of a performance comes through, something authentic. I love that word, Gabe. Some view, some interpretation. The left hand should not always be mirroring the right hand. You've got two hands for a reason. The left hand ought to be doing something regarding dynamics and phrasing and shape. You shouldn't be looking up at the sky and conducting the Heaven Philharmonic. You should be looking at the music. Herbert von Karajan got away with that, but he was famous first, then he got away with it.
Right.
There should be some eye contact. Basically, what I think committees look for is that the conductor is making some difference. And the only other thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back to Gabe and Diane, is in the end, this is the part that's not in your control. And I have been in enough searches now, with enough search committees, where I have seen two quite similar quality orchestras react 180 degrees opposite each other to exactly the same video. I saw a video of a conductor that the East Texas Symphony musicians, who were all Dallas freelancers, 3 minutes and they said, get it out of here. We don't want to see this. The Illinois Philharmonic, which is Chicago freelancers, loved it, brought him to the finals, and made him the music director. Exact same video. So you can't, chemistry is a hard thing to, if the orchestra didn't like its previous music director and your podium demeanor looks similar, you're dead. And there's nothing you can do about that.
Right. Gabe, what do you think?
That transfers so well to what I was going to say. Every orchestra is looking, depending on whether their last music director was a success or not, they might be looking for very different qualities. One of the things we were looking for was a lot of passion in our conductor in the new video of in videos of our music director candidates. But I would also echo what Henry was saying about mirror beating. Absolutely, there are little things in conducting techniques that our lay people on the committee ask us before we watch these videos, what types of things can we look at to know whether this conductor is good or not. And a little bit of information can be a very dangerous thing, because they then become the experts in mirror beating, and they catch it at all times. Absolutely not looking up and consulting the heavens when you conduct, because we want to see, as Henry said, that the conductor is making a difference, that they're engaged with the orchestra. What's even more impressive than a perfect performance that the conductor gets out of an orchestra is when something goes wrong and they're quickly able to fix it. If we can see you on camera address something or immediately look where a problem occurs and then fix it, it's so impressive, because that shows us that you haven't pre-choreographed all of your movements and that you're actually there to help us. I have to say, I prefer for the repertoire on the videos to be well-known and exciting pieces that everyone loves. I hate to say it, because I would like to think that, as Henry said, we musicians of these committees lead the discussions and can kind of give our opinions first as to what conductors we like and what's successful and what's not. But even depending on the musician, they might prefer to hear music that they already know and love and can identify with. So if you have that option, putting something from the Planets or Rachmaninoff Symphony, any big juicy music like that is always fun to watch at these meetings.
And this is going to sound really obvious and stupid, but I just had a conductor literally today send me links to his videos, and 2 of the 3 videos that he sent me links to, 80% of the video didn't show the conductor. They were shots of the orchestra. And
Yes.
that's a useless video.
Yeah.
And one of them, it took 3 minutes into the piece before the conductor was seen. By that time, the committee's given up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can I add a couple things? I want to follow up on what Henry said about the quality of the orchestra. I really do think that the quality of the orchestra on your video matters. And I know a lot of people out there, maybe your regular group is a youth orchestra or a community orchestra. And I think when you're up against people that are sending videos with professional orchestras, that difference in quality level is going to be heard, and I think people are going to, even if consciously they're trying to ignore it, it's still going to be a factor in the decision. So, you know, getting access to, you know, a professional level orchestra is, I think, going to help your video. Also, the very first thing, Gabe, what you said about, you know, good music and something exciting. I think to start a video with something that has some energy is going to put you in a better position than something that's very soft and slow and sort of, you know, a different sort of feeling. So thinking of the type of music, because in general, unless you're in that very, very short list, the first run through those videos, I think they're going to listen to maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes. They're going to be very quick about let's sort of get an impression of the field, and they're going to cut some people out from that. So if you want to stay in for that next round where maybe they will watch the full video, you've got to have the absolute best thing in the very front. I also think, you know, good sound, good camera angle. You know, a camera angle can make all the difference in just the way that they perceive how you're conducting. So I think to really take those things into account and making sure, if you can, to get the sound that actually is out in the hall, not where the camera is, you know, not getting all the horns and the timpani. And you know, if they can't hear the music, they're going to have difficulty getting beyond that, I think.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that the quality of the orchestra didn't matter, but I've talked to so many conductors who can't get a good professional orchestra video and are afraid to send a youth orchestra thing, and they wind up sending, frankly, a video that has a lot of other flaws, like you never see the conductor.
Yeah.
And if you can get the best playing that you can get, you should get. But if you can't, it is still better to send a video that shows you through the length of the video. The other thing I will say, Diane, most of the committees, at least on the searches I've done in the last 4 or 5 years, they take, let's say they have 40 videos, they divide the search committee into subgroups, and they assign a subgroup 10 videos and say, you watch at least 20 minutes of every one of these conductors. And that's beginning to happen more and more. And again, when you send links, what happens is you don't get to choose what the committee is going to watch first. You have links, and the committee will say, well, do we want to hear the Symphonie Fantastique or the Mozart Hefner or whatever? And you have no control over it anymore. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and just one additional thought that I would add in, you know, Diane, I think your point is very well taken, that the quality of the orchestra matters in a really real way, because what the committee is trying to do is envision you conducting their orchestra. So if the orchestra that you're conducting in your video is at an inferior level to the orchestra you're applying to conduct, that's a bad sign. Granted, they could be on your resume that you've conducted XYZ orchestra, but what they imagine you to be able to produce as a conductor, I think, is really important. So what I would say is that we talked at the beginning, and Diane gave us some good thoughts about creating a barometer for yourself about what jobs to apply to. Well, if you don't have video of yourself conducting the same level orchestra as the one you're applying to, that's a bad sign. So one of the things you can do is, there are lots of workshops out there, and we'll get to this a little bit later, where you know you're going to get video of yourself conducting an excellent orchestra. For example, let's be honest, the Conductors Guild is great at this, and I conducted the Baltimore Symphony through a Conductors Guild workshop, and you know you're going to get video there. So that has to be at the forefront of your thinking if you're really aiming for professional orchestra, to do that. And one thing that I would say, just as an assistant kind of cover conductor level with some top-level professional symphonies, ask so far in advance that they can't ignore your request to do a recording, because they have to go to the players committee and they have to go through their administration, and there are going to be rules. But if you give them 6 months lead time to figure that out for you, they may do it. But if you give them 6 days, they'll just tell you it's too much trouble. So if you do know you have an engagement coming up where you would like to record, and it may even be as a music director candidate, find out well in advance what the procedure would be to do that, and have your camera running if you can, always.
And let me quickly jump in there. The union rules, if it's a union orchestra, require that the whole orchestra vote. The committee cannot make that decision. So that adds time. Right. And if you give them 6 days, they won't even bother. The other thing is, some people will tell you that the union rules require the microphone to be on the camera behind the orchestra, assuming it's behind the orchestra to get your face. That is not true. When I was president of the league, I got that rewritten. The microphone can be in the front and the camera can be behind the orchestra. So you don't have to get a balance, which is frankly always a French horn concerto, because that's the one instrument pointing at the mic.
Yeah.
That was an old rule. It was changed 10 years ago, and some orchestra committees aren't aware of it, but push at it.
Great. And Henry, one of the great things about these Google Hangouts is that we can receive questions from people who are watching us. And one of the questions we received is about rehearsal footage on these videos. We've talked a lot about performance footage, but what impresses you when you're on a committee when you ask for rehearsal footage from candidates? What do you like to see them accomplish?
Well, different committees, it's interesting, different committees are looking for different things. A lot of the committees that I've been with have discounted rehearsal footage because they've made the point that the conductor can choose much more easily what portion of the rehearsal he wishes to send you, whereas the concert is the concert. It went or it didn't go. But what they're looking for is, some of the things that Gabe talked about. You know, how are you correcting things that go wrong? Are you doing it in a respectful but firm way? Are you being specific about the problem? And they're looking, I would say, and Gabe probably can answer this better than I can, but they're looking partly for your musical knowledge and your communication skills, and partly for, is the conductor being nice as opposed to abusive? Now, any conductor who sends to an audition abusive rehearsal deserves to be discounted on grounds of stupidity.
Yeah, can I jump in? I want to put it in disgruntled musician terms. In addition to having a wonderful personality, we're looking for someone who, how to put this, doesn't waste time on the podium, and who we feel like is treating our time valuably. So getting that effect, saying something concisely and clearly, and getting an effect out of the orchestra is the best rehearsal footage we can see.
Great. So if we follow the trajectory here, we've talked about picking jobs to which you might apply, about sending in your packet, now the videos. Now, let's assume, Diane, that you've been invited to conduct a week with the orchestra. I know when we worked together in one of your Beyond the Baton workshops, one of the things I took most from that was your ability to discern what makes a great week of guest conducting. And a lot of that has to do with picking the program and the soloist for the week, if you're able to do that. Of course, sometimes that's a sign. So what advice do you give, and maybe even some really specific tips about what pieces work and what don't on a subscription week?
Yeah, so it really depends on the level of the orchestra. So you if possible, you want to listen to some recordings so you know what the level of the orchestra is that you're programming for, and you want to ask for a list of probably the last 10 years of programming if you can. So you want to make sure that you're doing things that ideally that they have played before, because it's difficult in a search to be doing the piece with the orchestra the first time, because like Gabe said, they want to have a feeling of satisfaction, and therefore coming at it the first time it might be a little bit tough. You want to do pieces that you've conducted before. You shouldn't be putting on a search a piece that you've never conducted, because no matter how much you study it, there's always traps that appear, when you're in the middle of that rehearsal. There are certain pieces I feel that are more standing ovation type pieces that are search winning type pieces, but some of this depends on the level of the orchestra. Obviously, if you're applying for a community orchestra, you're going to be looking at a different set of pieces than if you're applying for a major professional orchestra that has a corps and rehearses every single day. So I put together a list of that I can kind of read some of these, where if you're looking at maybe a community orchestra, a smaller regional orchestra, I can just run through some pieces that I think work well, that are standards. So you're programming both for the orchestra itself and the members of the orchestra, and they're going to have a pretty strong vote in that. But you're also programming for the board, the women's committee, the entire community, everybody there. Often the audience gets a vote. So, depending on how that's weighed, you want to make sure that you're covering all the angles. So first off, and the Tchaikovsky Symphonies 4 and 5 usually work well. They both have good endings. Everybody loves them. The orchestra will enjoy playing them as long as you have something new musical to say to those. Beethoven's 7th is good. It doesn't use the trombones, though, so you want to keep that in mind because, it's a smaller ensemble. Brahms' symphonies, 2nd Symphony is good. The 4th Symphony is good. You could even do the 1st. I would not do the 3rd Symphony. At least not with an orchestra that wasn't fully professional. Dvorak's symphonies, New World, the 9th is always great. The 8th is good, though considered by some a little bit more of the community orchestra, smaller regional orchestra level. Dvorak's 6th Symphony is a nice work to do if you want to do a piece that everyone's going to love, but maybe that's not as familiar. And that can be a strategy, to come in there with a piece with a lot of new ideas, a piece that the orchestra hasn't played, but is not so difficult that they won't be able to play it well the first time. Shostakovich 5th is a great work, excellent ending. Firebird, if you've got wonderful brass, is a piece you consider. Prokofiev 5th Symphony actually puts together faster than people think, so that's another work that might work. Some of the overtures, standard things, Meistersinger, Shostakovich Festive Overture, those work well. Concertos that are not difficult to put together. Sometimes the strategy is to do an easier concerto so that you have more time for the symphony. And, something like a Saint-Saëns number 2, a Beethoven 3, 4, or 5 would work well. Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto always works. Rococo Variations, that's a shorter work, easy to put together, gives you more time for a meaty, second half. Things like the Barber Violin Concerto, the first, second movements are great, but killer last movement, So you have to kind of weigh, depending on the level of the orchestra, what might work well for that. So that's just a few ideas on repertoire. Go ahead.
It's so funny. All the pieces you've just mentioned are the ones we've been doing recently, and we actually just did a Barber, and the conductor did very well. But yeah, bring a good soloist with you. That's kind of shows us who you run with, who your people are, and if you bring a soloist that the orchestra can respect and follow, it bodes very well. We've had low brass players be really ticked off that more music on the program didn't feature them, because you also have to imagine from a career standpoint with how the per-service contracts might work, they're interested in being hired as often as possible. And so I've gotten comments from certain low brass or auxiliary instrumentalists saying, why weren't we needed for this concert? Is that what all their programming is going to be? I want to work, I want to contribute, I want to be. So yeah, and how you accompany a soloist will be very telling. And thinking back now that you mentioned that, Diane, we've had some very successful candidates come and accompany a Mozart concerto that was not difficult and did not take a lot of time for the orchestra to put together. We received some comments on stylistic things, but as for following the soloist, it was a pretty quick process. So that's definitely a good piece of advice.
Great. And along the lines of that week that you're going to spend with an orchestra, if you've been invited as a finalist, you're going to face some interviews from different constituents within the orchestral administration and within their community. So this will be for everyone, and I'm just going to ask in general, from the conductor standpoint, of course, Diane, the answers, and then from Gabe and Henry, the questions. What are things that conductors must be prepared to answer, and what are successful answers, and what might not be? Why don't we start with you, Henry?
Gabe hit certainly one of them. I've not yet been involved with a search that didn't say, can you help us get a younger audience? They were saying that 50 years ago, by the way. The audience grew older and started coming. And I think, again, you used the word, John, and I think Gabe did, to be authentic. Talk about your belief in how to reach younger people. It might be programming, it might be being willing to explore interesting venues. Now, one thing that's definitely changed in the last 20 years, I would say, is in every orchestra except maybe the top 10, the orchestra is going to expect you to speak to the audience, not just pre-concert lectures, but to speak from the stage. I happen to think it's a good thing. I think this stiff formality of the old form concert is long overdue for a burial. But you're going to be asked to do that, and you should talk about, and you should say, I'd be willing, and I will, at the concerts that you've chosen me for, I will speak. And you could do it at the beginning, you could do the first piece and then talk, you could do it after intermission. It shouldn't be technical, it shouldn't be musicological. You might talk about why these pieces were put together, but something communicating and being warm and inviting, bringing people in. I think the other questions that if I'm involved with the search, somebody will ask, because I will have told them to ask it, usually near the end. Okay, we've talked about all the things you bring to this orchestra, all of the successes you've had. If you were to look in the mirror and honestly say, this is a trait, this is a personality aspect that I should work on, this is something I need to develop and I'm not good at yet, what is that? That's it's a question that is used in hiring administrators in the corporate world. I've used it my whole life. And what you don't want to do is try to pat yourself on the back when talking about your shortcoming. Well, my problem is that I'm a perfectionist and I demand from everybody the same high standards I demand from myself. And sometimes maybe I push that a little too hard. That's a turn-off answer. Be honest. I mean, what I used to say, and I've learned finally, is that, I'm not always patient with people who are not up to speed. And sometimes I show that, and I make them very uncomfortable, and I'm really working on that. That's an honest answer. But you should be asked. Any skilled interviewer will ask you, what's your weak spot? And you should have an answer that doesn't expose your innards, but that is at least authentic and honest.
Yeah, don't say you can't read alto clef. That's my response.
No, I wouldn't do that.
Gabe, so why don't we go to you next and then Diane?
Yeah, I just want to give for three of the questions we asked, my favorite answers. One is related to how do you see your role in going out into the community and talking to these folks and raising funds and dealing with the administration. One of the best answers we've gotten well, for me during the process was someone said, I hate the word schmoozing. I am genuinely interested in people and hearing their life stories. I think it's so important to the art form to make a real connection, and I'm happy to do all of these events and get my, be out there, get my face out there and interact with all constituencies because I don't consider it schmoozing, I consider it being an artist. That was a very impressive answer because we're honestly looking for someone to come in and raise a lot of money. When it came to programming, what is your approach to programming? The buzzword for us has seemed, or the buzz phrase has seemed to be, on every program, something you can sell to the audience. So that has implications for then what type of contemporary music or unfamiliar music you can program. But we want to hear, as I said before, we're only doing 8 big weeks a year, so we can't have too much Brahms or Beethoven because even if we go through all the Beethoven symphonies, and do 1 or 2 a year, it's still going to be 5 years before we get to repeat it again. So we want to hear that we'll be doing great repertoire. And when I say we, I mean the musicians.
And Gabe, can I just pause for a minute there? Yeah. One of the questions we actually got from the audience while we're running here is, should conductors who are doing a search week consider putting new music onto the week? While we're talking about new music here, would you address that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Almost all of our candidates have programmed it because, most of our candidates are young and feel like it's important to the art form, which it is. I think you have to know the town. We run a little bit more conservative here in Knoxville, so we have gotten feedback from various constituencies, board members and audience, and some of the musicians who weren't always thrilled to be doing this very technical music. But I think as long as you make the point that it's important to the mission of an arts organization, and as long as you can say there's a difference between a lot of crud that's out there in new music and some really great gems of the contemporary music repertoire, that makes us feel better. And if we know that it's going to be programmed next to a romantic, war horse, then it also makes everyone feel better. And the last thing I would say is an important question we ask is, how do you deal with personnel issues? And every orchestra has personnel issues, and part of a music director's job is going to be to clean house. There's no other way to say it, and some of the musicians and board members and administration are waiting to see how you handle that. And the best thing that we generally hear from candidates is that they treat everyone with dignity and respect, but they understand that they will need to be firm in some cases, and they'll do what lets someone perhaps who needs to go leave with dignity and have a private, respectful conversation because they respect their years of service and that type of thing, but they can be firm when necessary.
I would add to both of your points, but I would add to that point, it's also perfectly fine to say, I've conducted your orchestra in one program for 1 week of rehearsals and 1 or 2 concerts. So I don't have any specific. Often a committee will say, well, based on what you just experienced, are there changes you would make? And the answer is it's much too early. I think maybe even a preface to what Gabe said is I think it's appropriate for you to say something like, my approach is to try to get the best out of everybody, to make them as good as they can be. That's my first step before I even think about anything else. Now, on the new music issue, the only other thing I would add to what Gabe said, do a little research before you get there on the last 4 or 5 years of programs at the orchestra. If they've never programmed anything later than early Bartok, don't come in there with too much radical repertoire because they're not ready for it, the audience nor the musicians. So you have to try. I think it's good to say, I'm going to stretch them a little bit, but know what you're stretching them from, what has been their approach.
Yeah, I agree, Henry, totally with that. And sometimes with new music, it's, you want to make sure you can get the job and then you can grow the orchestra. And sometimes if you're too much on the new music front and you don't get the job, then you don't have that opportunity to grow the orchestra. It's a question that almost always is asked, what is your opinion on new music? And you have to really make sure you know where the community is that you're applying for and what they're ready for. I think, interviews and things that I've done, the things that they always hit on are the same points, the fundraising question, what's the music director's role in fundraising, programming, how do you go about programming, how do you make your decisions, new music, and how you can build your audience. What I find is sometimes the committee actually doesn't have a lot of experience interviewing. And so you want to prepare yourself for that psychologically, that there might be lulls that you will actually need to fill in. And at the beginning, they will ask you to tell about yourself, and you need to have, that elevator speech ready. It can't be so long that you turn everybody off, but at the same time, you want to be able to hit the important high points of your life in a very concise way. And so often, I think you're not ready for that, where they just say, okay, just tell us about yourself, and then you stumble and you don't know what you're saying. So to really think ahead of time, what are the points you want to bring out that are important for that specific job, I think, and then to be ready to fill in when there might be dead spots or when they've run out of questions so that you don't hit this lull in the interview.
Yeah, but do let there be a pause of a second or two. Don't try to jump into every pause because you don't want to appear like the conductor who will never shut up.
Right.
So you have to judge that. And the question that you will get, along with what Diane just said, which is tell us about yourself, is tell us why this job interests you. Mm-hmm. And just think about that ahead of time and have an answer that relates to this job. It shouldn't be, well, because I need a job, I need a paycheck.
Right.
And one thing that I would just add here at the end of this topic that is obvious but we didn't get to is just you will be asked, what are your questions for the committee? And that is your chance, just like in the cover letter, to show off what you learned about the orchestra and asking intelligent questions about how you specifically would fit into that picture. And they need to be, again, this is the buzzword for the evening, be authentic, but also they should demonstrate something about what you know about them. And that's really important, and it will always happen.
Yep, and it will always be, or almost always be, the last question.
Right. Great, so we're going to do 2 more questions and we're going to wrap this up. One of the things that we've heard from our audience members here is questions about, on the resume, what to include and what not. And I think, at the beginning, Diane, you referenced, don't include everything. So some of our constituents in the Conductors Guild, of course, their focus is going to be in school and workshops. Other people are coming from a background of educational jobs, and they're looking to move into the professional fields. So can you tell us a little bit about how long you keep workshops, festivals on your resume? And one question that I always have is, in your repertoire list, do you include pieces that you've just rehearsed or just rehearsed in a workshop setting, or what point do you turn over to just the pieces you've conducted in a concert? So can we just field 1 or 2 thoughts from everybody here about what type of things should appear on your resume and for how long?
Well, one of the challenges is when you're getting fresh out of school, you haven't done enough concerts, and therefore your resume, your repertoire list is very, very short. So I actually recommend don't even send it unless they ask for it, if it's going to be a very, very short list, because it's going to probably knock you out as opposed to putting you in. And often they don't ask for that now until a much later round.
Agreed.
Yeah, and so and then dealing with the festivals, I actually recommend getting those off pretty quickly, because once again, any job you're applying for, probably there are people that have a lot of experience that are out of school for a long time. Mm-hmm. And if they're looking to, they may be looking to hire that young, talented student fresh out of school, but then again, if you're up against somebody that has, 5 years of experience and is doing really great, they're probably going to go with that person. So I say, don't present yourself as a student when you want to actually get hired for a professional job.
I would add, though, that if it's a very prestigious festival, if you were invited to be at Tanglewood or the Conductors program in Aspen, I'd keep that for a while. The mere fact that you were chosen is going to be, I think, seen as a positive, and I would do that. I think the other thing is, I know I'm back to my idée fixe of the cover letter, but you can address what might look like the weaknesses on your resume in your cover letter. I won't take a lot of time, but it's a worthwhile story. There was a conductor who's a good friend of mine, who's mainly been the music director of a youth orchestra. And he kept not making it to the video stage of every orchestra he applied to. And he came in to see me, and I said, well, why do you think this is happening? He said, well, it's because I've only conducted a youth orchestra. Well, how do you address that in your cover letter? And he said, well, I don't, because I don't want to highlight it. And I said, you've just told me that you think they know it. Of course they know it. Your resume says it. What you need to do is write a cover letter that says, you may think that because I've only been music director of a youth orchestra, I'm not right for this job. Here's why, in fact, I am. Put it in and convince them that you are ready. And by golly, he's one of the finalists now in Search, because his letter suddenly came alive. So you can use the cover letter in a way to try to say, this may look like an issue. Let me tell you why it isn't. You won't convince every committee, but you might convince 1 or 2.
And along those lines, Henry, could you talk about that question we were posed about the high school level conductor looking to move into the professional ranks?
Yeah. If it's somebody who's been conducting in high schools for 4, 5, 6 years, I think there's probably still a chance. You need to focus again in your cover letter. What else have you done? With whom have you studied? So if you've been conducting in high schools for 25 years, I think you have to come to grips with the fact that probably a professional orchestra is going to not look at you. They've got 150 applicants with professional experience, and they're going to say, he's been in high schools for 20, 25, 30 years. This is just not for us. It may sound unfair to you, but if you're sitting on a committee, which you're volunteering your time for, and 150 people have applied for the job, you have to use some criteria. So again, if it's been a short period and you studied with a respectable conducting teacher or program somewhere, you've been in a workshop, and now you've had this high school job for a few years, focus on those professional preparation things that you did, and just try in the letter to persuade them that they should look past this.
Great. And so for our last question, we're going to complete the process of the applications and assume success. So you've been offered the job, and you're very, very excited because you've been chosen out of 150 people, but now you have to sit down and have your negotiation. So we'll start with Diane on this one. And Diane, what are things that when you've been given notice that you've won a job, conductors need to keep in mind when they sit down with an experienced negotiator who is going to try to make the deal be the best that it can be for the orchestra and flip it and make sure it's the best it can be for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult position because when we graduate from school, we're not usually shown conductors' contracts. We're not, we're not professional negotiators. We're just so happy we got the job that we're ready to sign. Just show me where I can sign on that dotted line. And so you have to think, you have to realize, one, it is a negotiation, and they've gone through a lot of the search, and they finally decide they want you. So you are in a position of power in that. And so you shouldn't be afraid to really think through what your needs are. So the needs, everybody thinks immediately, okay, you think salary, that's the obvious one. But with conductors, there's so many other things that you can also think about and talk about. So you want to make sure that it's very clear how many concerts you're conducting. So you don't want to go into a situation and have them suddenly add 3 or 4 concerts, and then you find out that you're not going to be paid for those. And so that's much easier to negotiate up front. What does this flat fee they're paying you cover? And to be very clear about that so there's no misunderstandings after the fact. If you're traveling to that orchestra, then all of those things can be talked about. Will they cover the travel or not? Can they provide housing or not? Can they provide a car? What is the situation there? So you want to make a list of anything that might come into the discussion of what your needs might be. One thing I always try to write into a contract is professional development. Even $1,000 or so to allow you to go to a conference, the Conductors Guild conference or the League conference, or to do a conducting workshop in Europe, or to go study with someone. It's so much easier if you bring that up before you sign a contract. And I think they would take that as a positive. You want to improve yourself. You want to be the best that you can be, and if they can put a little bit of funding aside for that, that's a great thing. So just thinking through those types of things. You may want to negotiate where if they do add on concerts that it's a much lower than a guest conducting fee so that you don't hinder the growth of the orchestra where they go, oh, we can't add a concert because we have to pay our conductor this much more just to do that concert. So keeping in mind that they're looking at their finances too. And I always try to encourage, if I can put a built-in raise into the contract, it's so much easier to say, okay, give me a cost of living raise than to every single year have to go back and kind of beg for it. Because whenever you go back, there's never any money. It's always tight. And so if you just put in the contract ahead of time, it takes the pressure off both sides.
Right.
I would agree and add that one of the big issues for smaller orchestra jobs now, it's actually for big ones too, if you're applying for an orchestra as music director, for example, that does 6-7 concerts a year, you're not going to want to be in that city 52 weeks a year, and they understand that. What I always advise orchestras, the residency issue is likely to come up. I advise orchestras, first of all, to divide the pay into 2 parts, a conducting fee and a music director salary. And I also suggest that they put in the contract the number of weeks over and above conducting weeks that you have to be there. That's a point of negotiation. My recommendation to orchestras is 50% additional weeks. So if you have to be there 6 conducting weeks a year, you have to give them another 3. They don't have to be whole weeks. They can be 6 half weeks. They can be some of them added on to the beginning or end of a conducting week. But you have to do auditions, you have to participate in fundraising and other administrative work. You can't do it for less than that. I think actually for a 6-concert orchestra, probably 4 weeks is even better than 3. But it ought to be in the contract so that there's no, they aren't made to feel guilty for asking you to come back, and they are also limited. They can ask you to do more, you can volunteer to do more, and if you're free, you should. And you shouldn't demand to be paid for giving them a few extra days. But at least this sets an expectation that your job is more than standing on the podium, which it is.
Great. And I think one of the powerful things kind of overarchingly about the contract negotiation is, like you both referenced, Henry and Diane, is don't let things that could be solved before you start the job become issues after you're in it. So talk about the things that are going to come up, like built-in raises and what your library budget's going to be and what your soloist budget's going to be and all of these things, so that once you're there, you're working on issues that are productive for the orchestra rather than fending for yourself within the organization. I think that's great. So that's a really outstanding place, I think, for us to wrap it up. A couple things to pitch from the Conductors Guild side of things here. One of them is that we have a mentorship program where many of the people on our board of directors and even some people that are just members who have lots of experience within the conducting world will meet or discuss with you on the phone or via email free of charge to all Conductors Guild members issues that are pertinent to your career. So if you go onto the Conductors Guild website and click on the Resources tab, the top entry there is mentoring, and there will be a contact list available to members there with email addresses for folks that are willing to give of their time to meet with you. So if you're a beginning of your career conductor and topics that were discussed at this Hangout are of interest to you, we encourage you to go on and talk to somebody there who's on our mentoring staff. We also mentioned workshops. The next workshop deadline is coming up in early April for the Cabrillo Festival out in Santa Cruz, California. Maren Alsop and James Ross will be the faculty members, and you'll work with the fully professional orchestra, and you'll have recordings made by the Conductors Guild for your personal use from that workshop. So we encourage everyone to apply. There are auditor spots available, and there are limited participant spots and full participant spots. That's a new thing that we're adding in this year. We're very happy to be able to offer to conducting students, so please do apply to that festival as well. I thank Gabe Lefkowitz, I thank Henry Fogel, and I thank Diane Wittry for giving of their time and their experience towards the Conductors Guild Google Hangout initiative here. This has been episode 3, and you'll receive an email, and watch out on the Conductors Guild Facebook page for episode 4 when that gets announced next month. Thank you so much to everyone, and enjoy your evening.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.